Hello, and welcome to our special Easter edition of Soul Talk with Father Jay. My name is Sean Pullen, and with us today is Father Jay. So today, because we're filming this on Wednesday, but we're going to be setting this out on Thursday, Holy Thursday, the first day of the Triduum. Now, for those of you who may not know that word or have heard it only a little bit, we're going to turn to Father Jay to explain what is the Triduum completely.
Well, we want to go down to real basics. It's 3 days. Beyond that, this is the Paschal Triduum, and so it is the 3 days that, as far as the church is concerned, form one action. Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and the resurrection on Holy Saturday. And that may sound a little bit strange, but for those who are, are used to or have gone to the Easter Vigil, you understand that this is in the night of Holy Saturday. And so it really is the beginning of Easter, since, as we know, there was the difference at one time as to people's sense of when the day started.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's still a Jewish tradition to start the day at sunset.
Well, at least as far as the Sabbath goes.
Okay.
Because the Sabbath starts on Friday at sundown and ends on Saturday at sundown. And I can attest to that, having experienced it in Jerusalem many years ago, on the only trip I ever took to the Holy Land. But we were there, in Jerusalem on Friday and Saturday. Friday at whatever time it was, all the sirens blared, everything ceased.
Oh, wow.
And on Saturday, the sirens blared in the evening and everything started up again.
So that highlights the importance, really, of the vigil in the fact that the night of the vigil really is viewed as Easter Sunday itself.
Well, it's the entrance into Easter Sunday. Because when we speak of the resurrection, we usually speak in the morning with the Marys at the tomb and finding it empty. However, they find it empty, which means that somewhere in between, the resurrection has taken place. Christ has risen already, but he hasn't manifested himself as of yet. And so basically, that is how we compress the 3 days.
So they consist of Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and the Easter Vigil.
Right.
Not Easter Sunday, which is more just its traditional.
Easter Sunday is, in a certain sense, as I just said, the revelation of the resurrection.
And the resurrection itself happening during the evening.
Sometime
during the night. As a priest, would you say it's important for lay people to make an effort to go to all three? I mean, that wasn't what I grew up with. But, since working in a church, we just went on Easter Sunday. I mean, we went to church every week, but it was, for us, it wasn't a big special thing. We just went on Sunday.
I guess there's a lot of truth to that. It was not emphasized that much. When I was growing up, there was a little bit of emphasis on Holy Thursday. It wasn't so much my family, as because I went to a Catholic school, the nuns kept impressing Holy Thursday. And I just wanted to go myself. So
Well,
I tried to when I was able to.
and Holy Thursday, I think, would bear a big significance for us as Catholics because Holy Thursday is where we get Eucharist from.
Eucharist and priesthood.
And priesthood, which I think that's why for here in our CCT, Father Mike has been so putting so much emphasis on Holy Thursday with trying to have a big supper beforehand. Also a plug for that supper. It's at 5:15 and it's a potluck supper. Please come if you're able.
St. Jude's.
At St. Jude's in the Fellowship Hall, followed by the Mass. And he's making sure that all the deacons are there. You're going to be there.
Yes.
Representing the retired priests who help us out. So I feel like Holy Thursday really does bear a significance. I mean, they all do in their own way.
They all do in their own way. You're right. And it was just, I guess, more insightful of me with these things as I grew older, and certainly in the seminary and as a priest. Obviously, Holy Thursday is kind of an anomaly in one sense, because it's one day when Mass cannot be celebrated in the morning unless there is a dire need for it. And exactly what that is, they never explain.
They just say dire need.
But because it represents the Last Supper, the night before Christ died, it takes place in the evening. And so it's hard for working families. And now all of a sudden I understand, having gone to Catholic schools, why the Easter vacation always began on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Thursday through Easter week. And so it was emphasized there. But, you know, if you're working, the modern workday world doesn't, allow so much for that. You go to work, you get home, you try and eat supper, and you have a family or whatnot. And, it's difficult. It's difficult for a 7 p.m. Mass, which is what time most of them are at.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit. You and I were both at the Chrism Mass last night at the cathedral, which is another aspect of Holy Thursday. The rubrics call for it to be in the morning on Holy Thursday, the only Mass in the morning. So I guess my former statement was a little bit wrong. But the Chrism Mass, and that's a Mass at the cathedral with the bishop consecrating the oils.
Which we talked about in our Sacraments of Initiation episode.
Right. And so, but it also called for the renewal of the promises of priesthood for the priests. And, that is important too, because as Bishop Fisher mentioned last night, Holy Thursday represents the institution not only of the Eucharist, but of the priesthood, because to have the Eucharist, you need the priests.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore the two go together. And so it's a very special day for priests, and I guess that's how I have come to appreciate it so much more. And it really is, it's a time for us to reflect on what Christ did at that Last Supper. How he took the bread and took the wine and changed them into his body and blood. Now, he was still before the crucifixion, but he was doing there for his apostles and for the church for all eternity, presenting what was happening the next day. The offering of himself to God as a sacrifice or as an offering for our sins, that they might be forgiven. And so, as we celebrate the Eucharist, we recall that. And Holy Thursday becomes the epitome of that as we celebrate that Last Supper. And following the celebration of the Last Supper in the Mass, there is always a period of adoration.
Mm-hmm.
The Mass is followed by adoration of the Blessed Sacrament.
Which I want to plug right now is at St. Jude's. All of the other churches will be closed, but because St. Jude's is hosting Holy Thursday, that is where the adoration will be taking place from 8 p.m. until midnight.
Right, because after midnight, there is to be no adoration. Because then, in our modern way of looking at things, and we kind of mix up this eve and uneve and whatnot, it kind of moves into Good Friday because Christ is arrested and taken for trial before the Sanhedrin and then before Pilate, etc. But getting back to the adoration itself, it's kind of a reflection of Christ calling upon the apostles to leave the supper, singing hymns, etc., and going to the Mount of Olives and those 3 hours of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Those 3 hours of prayer which Christ experienced at that time, even though the apostles couldn't stay awake.
Yes, and not even one of them.
Not even one of them could stay awake. They just drowsed off while Christ was having this kind of anticipation of what was coming, kind of feeling it already in, that his sweat became drops of blood.
Mm-hmm.
And, that type of a sincere, total giving himself into prayer to the Father. And then, obviously, we pass to Good Friday, which is the only day in the Christian calendar that Mass is not celebrated.
And that's period, because
Yeah, there is absolutely no exception to that.
No exception. And I remember years ago there was somebody who had even wanted a funeral on that day, and it was you cannot have a funeral mass.
No, you cannot have the
Friday.
Mass. You can have the blessing of the body,
mm-hmm.
and that's it. And I mean, when I say the blessing of the body, it isn't just standing at the door and blessing the body. It is the liturgy of the Word.
But not the liturgy of the Eucharist.
It has to end with the liturgy of the Word, with the homily, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I find that, to be very, very real.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have experienced in my family numerous people who have died in Holy Week. The first was my uncle, who was also my godfather.
Mm-hmm.
The second was my great aunt, who had been like a grandmother to me. And finally, my mother. And, when my aunt had died on Monday of Holy Week, we had the funeral on Wednesday. And it wasn't a big deal because it was basically family only.
Yes.
With my mother, she died on Tuesday of Holy Week. And it was impossible to have a Wednesday funeral because just logistics. And so, I said to my brother and sister, well, we can do it on Friday, but it'll only be, and my sister said, no, we're not burying Mom without a Mass.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had it the following Tuesday because Again, my sister didn't want to wake on Easter.
Yes, which also understandable. So when we go to Good Friday, it's specifically, I know noon is often used for something, whether it's stations, whether it actually is having the service. And I know 3 o'clock is more common, though, because 3 o'clock is actually specifically said in the Gospels.
Well, yes, is when Christ died.
As when Christ died. Why is noon sometimes allowed?
Well,
or is it allowed to be whenever in that period?
Well, again, when I was younger priest, I should say, and I was in large parishes, and in most of them, we had a service at 3, and we repeated it at 7. Again, because people work.
Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't attend the other one. As I said, it's a liturgy of the word, very similar to that of Palm Sunday.
Including reading the Passion.
Yes, reading, it's always the Passion from John on Good Friday. And we have that, and then we have what is called Adoration of the Cross, where we bring forward the cross. In the old tradition, the cross, all the crosses and all the statues in the church were covered from the Sunday before Palm Sunday through to Easter.
Now, where did that tradition come from? I know, but for those...
Actually, I have no idea. It just developed over the ages.
So from what it was always to mimic Jesus hiding.
Well, being buried in the tomb, yes. But the point of it, at that point, is at the Good Friday service, the cross is uncovered.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess the whole point of it being that we come to that point of, all of a sudden, this strikes us. This is what happened. And the covering of the statues, I think mainly was because there's become over the years so many devotion to saints, etc., that for Good Friday, our focus should be Jesus and the crucifixion.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of, not the other things are bad, but this isn't the time for them.
Yes.
This is a time for us to concentrate on the death of Christ. And so that's it. Noon sometimes is kind of thought of as the time the whole thing began. But Mark's gospel says 9.
Yes, I
9
remember
in
that
the morning.
too.
And I think that's important for us to remember because it makes more sense in reality that it would have been earlier because the high priest convoked in the middle of the night. They did their little thing, blah, 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 blah. Then they went off to Pilate in the beginning of the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And they went through the whole trial with Pilate and this and that and whatever took place then. And then they led Jesus out to be crucified. Well, that makes some sense. So the noon is perhaps the midpoint or the beginning or whatever you want to call it because we're a little shaky on the time frame here.
Mm-hmm.
Because there isn't always total agreement. But the whole point is nobody had clocks. I mean, the sundials and the sand clocks.
Well, and to be honest, even the description of it in the Bible is it was about.
Right.
And it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
It was about 9 o'clock. It always,
right,
in that same vein of thought, kind of hedges the time.
right. It was a day when everybody was at least the authors of the Gospels, the apostles, the witnesses were all in shock.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put it that way. They were scared. They were in shock. They were in hiding for the most part.
Well, and and it's such a powerful day. But my friend Liz always says it's her favorite service of the entire year. She said she will do anything to go to a Catholic Good Friday service because she said it's so powerful with the adoration of the cross, with the different components, with the priests when they come in and they lay prostrate
right
on the ground. She said it's just really beautiful, and then to leave in that complete silence.
Right. But just getting beyond that, the adoration of the cross, where the congregation is invited to come forward to kiss the cross or bow to it, or I know we've all become
germ conscious.
Yes. So a lot of people don't want to kiss it, but that is the traditional way of doing it. And people will, kiss their hand and place their hand on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
Others will just stand there and bow. Whatever. It basically says that we're recognizing that the cross is the instrument by which Christ died, and that it is through this death that we are saved. And so the wood of the cross becomes holy, and we acknowledge it. This is followed then by communion. While there's no Eucharist, in the sense that there's no Mass, there's no consecration of the elements, etc., what's been consecrated previously on Holy Thursday is then used for communion, beginning with the Our Father, going through the whole communion rite, and then basically ascending forth. Invitation, you can stay as long as you want,
Mm-hmm.
as long as they keep the doors open.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately there's a problem with that in our modern world too, with keeping places unlocked. But we try to do the best we can to offer people that opportunity to adore or to spend time in prayer and meditation on what has taken place. And now basically you can put in your advertisement for Good Friday.
And then the advertisement. Each one of our 5 parishes is celebrating Good Friday. Well, celebrating.
Well,
observing.
Yeah.
OLC is at noon. St. Christopher's, St. Jude's, and St. Amelia's are at 3 p.m. And then, as Father Jay talked about, St. Francis is at 7 p.m., with that keeping in mind of people working and people not always being able to come to noon or 3 o'clock.
Right.
And that observance being able to be held. And then we turn the tides to what we talked about a lot in our last episode, the Easter Vigil itself. Holy Saturday.
Right. The Easter Vigil itself is basically, yes, it's the resurrection, but it's what flows from the resurrection too, which is most basically baptism. And that comes across as we begin the celebration, and we begin it with a good deal of difference. We begin by lighting the new fire.
Mm-hmm.
The new fire just symbolizing the newness. And from that fire, that pure new fire, is lit the Paschal or Easter candle. And this candle is basically, the procession begins then. It marks Christ as risen. It represents the risen Christ symbolically. And that candle is processed through the church to the altar. But as it's processed, the church is dark.
Mm-hmm.
Dark like a tomb. But from that Easter candle, people are given candles to hold themselves. And all of these candles are lit basically from the Easter candle. And it just kind of spreads throughout the church, giving light to the whole church.
And if you haven't been there, I personally find it one of the most beautiful things to see.
It is. It's wonderful. And then we get to the altar, the place where the candle is going to be placed. And then, to Sean and many other musicians' great horror, the Exalted is sung, a song of praise.
And it's a very long chant. This year, our own Deacon Mike Ficarelli is going to be singing it and intoning it, which he has a lovely voice and has used that talent for a lot of years. So we're very fortunate to have him, and my own personal plug is better him than me. But it's actually quite beautiful because, and the way we're doing it, because it's optional, we're going to do it in dimmed lighting. So the candles can still be seen, and the candles which hold it. And then after the Exaltet, we move into the readings.
The Liturgy of the Word. And the Liturgy of the Word is a long liturgy. This is a vigil Mass, not like your normal Saturday vigils, which are just the Sunday Mass, on Saturday evening. This is a true vigil where we're waiting. We're waiting. And that's one of the reasons that it is not supposed to begin until after sunset, which is liberally interpreted.
I can recall way back that there was one point where the cathedral itself had it at 7:30 when the sun was still quite high.
Yes, it happens. But at any rate, and so it is a long Mass. There's no getting away from it. It's a long Mass. And so we have the liturgy of the Word. And because it's a once-a-year celebration, even a priest who's been ordained nearly 47 years, like myself, nearly 48 years, like myself, will have to look at the rubrics every time to remember what goes where and in what order what happens. And so basically you have a number of Old Testament readings, Genesis, Exodus, and some other from the prophets. And I believe there are 7 of them. Yeah, 7 of them. After the 7th, there is
the Gloria.
Yeah, you see, it's all twisted a little bit, and my brain is not working as well this morning. I was up late last night, having gone to the cathedral for the Chrism Mass, and getting up today was really a pain. But at any rate, then there's the Gloria, followed by the opening prayer.
Yes.
And then the epistle, which is from Romans.
And then, after all of that, we move to the Gospel. And then we begin what we talked about last time, the rites of initiation, where we begin with baptism.
Well, we begin by the blessing of Easter water.
Yes, for the purposes.
Right. And the blessing of the baptismal font.
And in addition to new baptisms, it always has the renewal of baptismal promises.
For the entire congregation.
So even if you are not getting baptized for the first time, you do renew your promises, which in that same vein is kind of how the priests had to
on
yesterday
Chrism
at
Mass.
the Chrism Mass
Right.
renewed their priestly promises.
Correct. And, it's a very real thing. And it kind of gets to be a little repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of awkward. I have to admit, it's just awkward, at least from my perspective as a priest. You do have the whole baptismal vows. You have the people being baptized. But if we're doing with adult converts, you also have some who are not being baptized necessarily, but who are receiving into the faith
Mm-hmm.
because they're already baptized in a different Christian religion. And we do not repeat baptism. Baptism is baptism. Once it's done, it's done. And all it needs, essentially, at the most basic, is the pouring of water and the expression of the Trinitarian formula, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And so that takes place. But if there are adults who are being received into the church, adults who are being baptized, they are also confirmed then.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go on. And the renewal of baptismal vows, and basically then, after all of that is accomplished, we go on with Mass as normal.
And then we're back into the actual Mass, which would be the first Eucharistic prayer since Good Friday.
Right.
It has no Mass. And that brings us to the end of the Triduum.
Yes.
And this year, the plug for it, as we wrap up, is it will be at St. Christopher's at 8 o'clock, which I believe is after sunset.
It'll be close.
Right close on the cusp. And we have a lot of really beautiful music. We have a lot of and we have, I think, 4 confirmation candidates. No baptismal candidates, but 4 confirmation candidates who will be receiving their confirmation on that evening. So we hope you're able to join us. Yes, it is long, but it is one of the most beautiful masses you could go to in the entire year. And I think most of our priesthood is going to be there, most of our priests, if not all of them. So we invite you as well to come and to join us on that night. And I think that wraps us up, aside
Just
from
about,
Easter Sunday.
I just want to throw in with what Sean said and what I said earlier, is a long liturgy. If you come, be prepared. Be prepared to celebrate, to be there. If you feel you can't, for one reason or another, and there are many legitimate reasons, take that time, that amount of time. It isn't for you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can just, in a sense, and of course we're at Mass, so you aren't going to do this, but sit back and absorb it all. Because you're absorbing, but you're also participating as a part of the Eucharist too. And so you're not just sitting back, but, it kind of...
Taking it all in.
Yeah, taking it all in. Basically, just being surrounded by the whole majesty of God's plan of salvation. That's why the readings start out with Genesis in the very beginning.
Though I will say, our one plug, we're doing only 3 of the 7
of the Old Testament readings.
So there is that little bit of...
There is that option.
Little bit of break, because you have to at minimum do the 3.
Right.
So that helps a little bit.
And one that always has to be done is Exodus.
Yes. And that one will be sung.
Okay.
The whole way through. So it'll be a little different.
That will be different, yes. Okay. So at any rate, see, I didn't even know that.
Well, thank you guys for joining us, and we hope that you have a blessed Easter, and we hope that we see you at most of the Triduum, and we are really looking forward to it.
Take care. Have a very good and holy rest of this very, very exciting and holy week.